Hey guys, it's Jeff from Magnolia Photography, SC wildlife photographer in Charleston, South Carolina. Today we are out at Boone Hall Plantation, and this is kind of a busy day here today. I'm doing a bunch of product reviews for you, as well as trying to capture some videography and some photography of the wildlife that's going on. And I've been doing that since 9 o'clock this morning. It is just about 11:30 right now. I'm going to be putting out, though, a couple of videos from Boone Hall today. I'm going to be doing one in which I'm featuring a carbon fiber tripod that may be of interest to you. It is the Interel RT80C, so that video will be coming out very shortly. It may already be out by the time you see this one, or it may be coming out after this one. I'm not sure what the timing is going to be with those exactly, but at any rate, just keep your eyes open for all of these videos, whatever one you're watching and whenever you're watching it. But this video is not about the tripod. This video is about the lens that we see on top of my camera. Yes, this is a new lens that I got about a week and a half ago. This is the Sony 400-800 variable aperture lens with a 6.3 to f8 aperture. Now, of course, as we are at the 400 meter range, we're looking at the 6.3 aperture, and as we work our way out all the way to 800 millimeters, eventually we'll be at f8. Now, I know what you guys might be thinking. Jeff, why would I want an f8 lens? How am I going to blur the background? Well, let me tell you, when you're at 800 millimeters and you have this lens at f8, your depth of field gets pretty shallow, and there is no issue with blurring out the background. Now, of course, you got to keep in mind, right? There's a lot of factors that play into how much background blur you get, right? Aperture is just one of them. Focal length is another, but of course we're talking about 800 millimeters. So if we're zoomed in all the way on this lens and we are using an f8 aperture, we're going to get good background blur, especially if we take our subject and move them further away from the background. So if you're shooting something relatively close to you, you're going to get really good background blur with this lens. Now, I'm out here doing a bunch of video and photos today. I'm trying this lens without the teleconverter, with the teleconverter. I'm going to share all of these photos with you. I'll share when the teleconverter is on or off. But this lens so far, I am really, really impressed with it. I've used it for the past week and a half. This, like I said, this is the first day that I've been able to get out and really spend a day using it, doing a lot of work with it. Most of the work that I've done so far has been, minimum amount of time out in the field, right? Half hour here, half hour there. But I've used it in low light conditions, and I've had a lot of success with it, even with those apertures that are a little higher. The other thing that I would say is it's a pretty big lens, and there is a little bit of weight to it. It's definitely heavier than the 200 to 600 lens that I'm used to using. But most of the time when I'm using this lens for photos, I'm hand holding it. Now you can notice, right, with that longer focal length, the added weight to the lens, when you're lining up your subject, you can see that there's a little jittery shake in the lens, right? That's just kind of what comes when you're using these really long lenses. You just tend to get a little bit more handshake, and that handshake is a little bit more noticeable. So it's really not something that I recommend going too low on with shutter speed if you're looking to hand hold. If you're going to be at 1/800th of a second or less, I would definitely recommend that you get on a tripod or a monopod or some kind of stabilizing device, whatever that may be. Other than that, though, lens works really, really well. And I'm excited to show you guys the footage that I get from Boone Hall today. And I will be doing more talking about this lens when I get back in the studio. We will talk more about the lens itself and the different switches that are on it, and we'll go over all those details. But for right now, I just really wanted to share with you that I'm out in the field with this lens. It's working great for video and photos, and I'm gonna go capture some more birds here because we have some more things coming into the area. Just had some white ibises fly into some trees nearby. So I'm gonna stop the video right here and just stay tuned, guys. I'll be back soon. All right, so we're back in the studio with the Sony 400-800 wildlife lens that, as I said it earlier in this video, is a new purchase for me. And I had a lot of fun with it out at Boone Hall Plantation today. Unfortunately, it was super hot out. The past couple times that I've gone out, my sessions have kind of been derailed by inclement weather. It's been rainy and thunderstormy a lot here. So I knew it was going to be sunny out. I knew it was going to be hot out today, but it was really hot. With the heat index, we were looking at somewhere between 105 and 110 degrees today. So that really tends to make wildlife just want to hang out and not be very active and not do a lot of things that are really interesting. But you know what? We captured what we could capture given the conditions. That is the way wildlife goes. Towards the end of this video, I will be sharing some of my video and photo footage from today's session, just so you guys can see some of the stuff that is being created by this lens. But I wanted to get this lens back into the studio, as I mentioned in my outside version, just to share the specs with you about this lens. And I've got a lot of notes here, so hence the reason why I have the computer rather close right now. I just want to go over these, make sure that I have everything in order for you and make sure that I don't forget anything. So I'm going to use this to refer to my notes. So again, this is a 400 to 800 millimeter lens, right? That gives us a ton of reach. 800 millimeters is a lot of reach. It is a variable aperture lens that goes from f6.3 at the 400 millimeter end all the way up to f8. And that, of course, will be at the 800 millimeter part of the lens. Now, if we're looking at how the aperture is going to work as we kind of cycle through the different focal lengths, as we go from 400 to 500 millimeters, we'll be at f6.3. As we go from 500 millimeters to 600 millimeters, we will be at f7.1. And as we go from 600 to 800 millimeters, we are going to be at f8. And this is according to Sony. I've seen some other reviews of these lenses where it seems like people were getting a little bit different numbers, but all in all, I think that that's, that's pretty reliable of what you can expect when it comes to aperture and focal length with this lens. Now, this is a G series lens. If you're not familiar with Sony, they have G series and they have G Master. G Master is the top of the line. And I think that myself and I think many other photographers would agree, this lens is getting into the area of becoming very questionable as to whether or not this is truly just a G series. I think a lens like this could actually carry the G Master tag on it. That would change the price too, likely. So we'll take just the regular G tag on it. But this lens is really, really good. It's really sharp. It's a real high quality lens. So, just keep that in mind. Not a big deal, just more of a formality really. But again, it is just part of the G series and not the G Master series. This zooming on this lens is internal, right? So that means, of course, as we turn the zoom on this lens, we're not seeing any part of the lens extend or retract while we do that. And of course, I'm a big fan of that because that tends to give the life of your lens a little bit more longevity, because as we have parts moving in and out, where that is happening, it kind of creates a little bit of a vacuum, and it makes the lens a little bit more susceptible to getting like dust and sand in there, and even water. It becomes another entry point for the elements to get in there. So you just got to use a little extra caution when you're out there using a lens that has an external zoom. Now, there's really not much you can do about dust and sand, right? Those things just kind of exist in the atmosphere naturally. But if you're working around water, just kind of make sure that you have some protection on your lens to kind of help you prevent getting water into those entry points. Let me talk about the zoom. We talked about the zoom here as far as it being all internal. But the other thing that's really nice is the 400 to 800 zoom. I mean, you can go from one end of the zoom range, to the other with really just a push of a thumb. So the throw on moving from 400 to 800 and 800 to 400 millimeters, very short. So Sony has done a real good job of making it super easy to go through the full range of focal lengths very easily and very quickly. Another thing with focusing here, this lens uses dual linear focus motors. And so what you want to take away from that is just understand that by using dual linear focus motors, this lens is focusing fast and accurately. So that is another nice benefit of this lens. When we talk about the elements and the construction of the lens, I'm definitely gonna have to refer to my notes here because there's a lot of numbers. There are 27 elements over a course of 19 groups. The aperture is rounded and it has an 11 blade diaphragm with 6 ED elements. And the 6 ED elements are really designed to reduce flare and ghosting. And I can say I had no issues whatsoever shooting out in the direct sun with this lens today. Never experienced flare or anything along those lines. So 27 elements, 19 groups, all of those things, that's a lot. And what you should understand is the more elements and the more groups and stuff that we have going on in a lens, generally speaking, we're going to see the quality of the lens increasing as well. Overall weight for this lens is 5.45 pounds. Now, as I was mentioning to you, I think in the earlier video when I was out at Boone Hall, this is noticeably heavier than the Sony 200-600 lens that I have. It's not horrendous, but you can notice a little bit difference. And as I was saying out there, when we get to that 800, right, when we're zoomed in at that 800 millimeter focal length, if you're hand holding it, even though you're going to be using fast shutter speeds typically, right, you're not going to see the little like micro shakes that are going on as you're holding it, but they did exist for me anyway. You could see it. It was kind of, when I was zoomed in on a subject that was a little bit closer, it was a little bit difficult, even though they weren't moving, to get them kind of composed in the frame the way I wanted to. I noticed when I got back to the editing room and was taking a look at some photos, there were a couple where I actually wound up chopping off the feet on the bird because I was zoomed in so closely, and there's just those little micro shakes, and it, you know, between shot to shot, my composition was changing a little bit, and some of the feet got cut off, some were in, some, you know, some just out. So those are some things just to keep in mind. And it's kind of why this is a really good lens to work with on a tripod or a monopod or some other stabilizing device that you like, a beanbag, whatever the case may be. But that does exist, and it does take getting a little bit used to. So you got to really make sure that you're using a good technique when you're taking pictures, right? Get those elbows tucked in, get everything as tight as possible, and you know, just try to eliminate those micro shakes as much as you can. You know, the front glass here on this lens, it's huge, right? But it does allow for screw-in filters. But it's 105 millimeters if you want to add a filter onto the front of this lens. That is large. All right. And really, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about a 59 millimeter filter thread or we're talking about 105, right? You always want to get a good piece of glass when you're putting a filter on, because what is the sense of investing in good glass for your camera if you're going to go and buy a really cheap filter to put over it, right? It's only going to be as good as the glass that you're putting on there. So if you get a real cheap filter, you're going to see a lot of image defects due to the cheap glass that comes with that filter. So especially with a wildlife lens, if you're going to be taking any kind of video and you want to put a filter on there so that you can use wider apertures, so that you can trick your camera into thinking it's darker out than it really is. And so you're using those neutral density type filters. Invest the money in a good filter so that you don't get, you know, degrading going on with your images, or at least not too much degrading going on. But it's going to cost you quite a penny to put a good quality filter on here. You're probably looking, you know, I would say it's probably fair to say at least $250 minimum, probably more like $300 or $400 to get a pretty decent filter to put on the front of this with that huge filter thread on the front of this front of this lens. As you can see, it also comes with the tripod collar, right, and foot here. So this will, of course, you know, rotate around the lens. You know, with the Sony 200-600, this foot was kept on by like a little thumb screw. so you could, loosen that up, and it was real easy to take off the foot. This one's got 4 screws in here that you would need to remove in order to get this foot off. So it's a little bit more inconvenient to take it off. But the reality is, with a lens like this, what Sony is really figuring is that you're not going to be taking it off very much. You really probably should have that on at all times, because they're really thinking that you're going to be using this lens in the majority of your cases with a monopod or a tripod. So why would you take it off, right? But just keep that in mind. It's also, it's not Arca Swiss compatible. So if you have an Arca Swiss device, you'll need to get a plate for this so that you can just put that on here and make your life a little bit easier. I don't know why they don't make this Arca Swiss compatible. It would be really nice if they did it. That would be a nice little extra touch, but they don't. So that's what we have, and that's what we need to deal with. Now, if we look at the lens from the side, and I'll show you some pictures of this too, we do have these different switches that are on here. So what we have is we have a switch at the top here that allows us to switch from autofocus to manual focus. We also have the full-time DMF switch over here. We can have that on or off. If we have it on, then we can go from having autofocus, and then we can manually focus without really having to do anything with the camera lens itself. I have it off. I don't generally use a lot of manual focus. I will generally change my focusing point to get to my subject. And if I can't get to them, generally I just let the shot go. So I don't do a ton of manual focus. Every once in a while, if it's a cool moment or a cool species, I might go to manual mode to get my focus in there, through manual focus. But other than that, I really don't use it much. So I just leave that off. It also has a focus limiter switch, right? So that you can use either the full range, or you can change it to limit it to close up or far away. The advantage of that, of course, is if you're photographing things far away, rather than have the full focusing range for the lens and the camera to have to worry about, you can just limit it to a distance that's a little further away, right? That's just going to speed up the focusing of the lens. So you do have the focus limiting switch there. You also have image stabilization on this, so you can either turn that on or off. And then we have a panning mode, or I should say an activity mode switch, and there's 1, 2, or 3. So 1 is basically for static animals, 2 is for if you're photographing something and you're panning, and 3 is to be used for, like, if you're doing birds in flight and you got birds moving erratically, it'll do a really good job judging those birds that are moving in those, those more erratic movements. So as I'm sitting here telling you guys about this, I'm kind of noticing that I had done a test recently on a tripod, and I had the image stabilization to off since I was on the tripod. And I just looked at it and noticed that it's still off. And so the pictures that I took yesterday, I did not even use image stabilization. And that may have been why I was seeing so many of those little micro shakes. But amazingly enough, my pictures still came out really sharp. Now, of course, the Sony A1 has some image stabilization built into it. But, for a long lens like this, having the image stabilization turned on the lens as well would have been a huge benefit. So I'm kind of glad this happened, because I think this just goes to show, guys, that it doesn't matter what level you are at when it comes to photography. We all make mistakes. We all overlook things. And this is a good reason why, before you start shooting, it's good just to take a quick look at your equipment to make sure all the settings are right. So that was a little bit of a blunder on my part, and hopefully you learn from my mistake. But it just goes to show we are all human. It doesn't matter how long you've been doing photography. We're all human, and we all make mistakes. All right, so what is this lens for? Who is this lens for? Well, obviously, we're talking about it for wildlife, so it makes a great wildlife lens. I think it's absolutely fantastic for those of you who like to photograph birds, because it's really going to give us that extra reach that we're looking for when photographing birds. One thing that surprised me with this lens, and one thing that I say to you guys all the time, most wildlife photographers aren't really complaining about having too much reach, right? We're always looking for more, right? That's the thing that we always want. There were several times yesterday when I was photographing birds where this was too much reach. Even at 400 millimeters, I had too much lens in my hands. I could not back off enough to capture the whole bird in the frame. And I wound up cutting off a lot of their wings or part of their body. So it was interesting to me because I've been over to Boone Hall a lot of times with my 200-600 lens. I've never run into that problem. But yesterday I did on multiple occasions. So there are some times when it becomes too much lens as far as a focal length. And that kind of brings me right into the conversation that I mentioned at the beginning of this video here is, should you get this lens if you have the Sony 200-600? Well, I do think that this comes down to some personal preferences. It comes down to budgets, comes down to a lot of different things. But what I found from a lot of other reviews that I saw was that this lens was basically a little bit redundant when it came, comparing it to the 200-600. Now, I don't find that personally. I don't find that at all. Yes, you can argue, well, you got 200-600 and 400-800, so you've only really got 200 millimeters. Couldn't you just crop or use a teleconverter or do some of those other things to make up the difference in the millimeters? And the answer, of course, is yes. But this is a newer lens. It's got, I think, compared to the 200-600 lens, I do think the autofocusing was a little faster and a little bit more accurate. I'm not complaining about the 200-600 by any stretch of the imagination, because as I've shared with you, my hit rate for in-focus shots with that lens is extremely, extremely high. And my hit rate yesterday with this lens was also extremely high. I'm just saying that with the new technology, you do get a few of those little better features, right? A little faster and a little bit more accurate when it came to autofocusing. So I do think you have that. The other thing that I think too is when we start talking about the apertures, right? The f6.3 to f8 on this lens. If we go to the Sony 200-600, we're talking about apertures of f5.6 to f6.3. So that lens is obviously going to allow a little bit more light. I think both of these lenses kind of shine under certain conditions. So the 200-600 is going to be a better performer than this lens when we are shooting in lower light. And of course, we are often doing that in wildlife photography, right? Whether it's early morning, early evening, the Sony 200-600 is, in my opinion, your ideal choice for those types of situations. I've used this in low light. I've gotten good photos with it. So I'm not saying you can't use it, but if we're looking purely at aperture and specs, we can allow more light with the Sony 200-600. That's going to make getting better photos a little bit easier. But when we talk about this lens compared to the 200-600, where we don't have to worry about how much light we have, we're not worried about the quantity of light, this lens is probably what I'm going to have on my camera 95% of the time. The only downside to this, of course, is like I was just saying, sometimes it's a little bit too much lens. And so the 200-600 can be a little bit more beneficial if you're working in tighter quarters. So that'll be something that you will have to decide based on the location that you're at. If you have a lot of open space and you've got room for the animals, to be moving around, this is probably your choice. But as things start to tighten up, as things get to get, those distances start to get a little bit shorter, you might want to consider the 200-600 in those situations. So I think the bottom line, those are just a couple of examples. I think the bottom line is that both lenses are great to have because both lenses have their advantages and disadvantages based on the situation that you're facing. So I plan on using both lenses at the same time. I'll probably just attach the 200-600 to my Sony a7R5, and I'll leave this lens on my Sony a1, and then I'll be prepared for anything that comes at me, hopefully. Of course, the trick there is figuring out how I'm going to carry both cameras and both lenses at the same time. But other than that, guys, I think that really covers what I wanted to cover with you on this lens. It is a fantastic lens. If you think you might be interested in it, maybe go to like lensrentals.com and rent a lens. I think you can rent it for about $170 for like a week. So maybe do that and get a feel for it. Make sure you like it if you're going to spend the $3,000 on it, or save the $170 and put it towards the purchase anyway, and just go buy the lens, right? Worst case scenario, you could always sell it later on down the road if you're not completely happy with it. But that's up to you. That's a decision you need to make based on your financial situation and your comfort level with that. All right, guys, if you like this video, if you found it useful, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. I want to make sure this video gets pushed out to other people like you and I who enjoy talking about these things, enjoy learning about these things. And while you're here, please consider subscribing to the channel. Don't forget, head over to magnoliaphotographysc.com/store, where you can take a look at all of the different guides and ebooks that I have for wildlife photography to help you advance as a photographer and your journey in wildlife photography. And down in the show notes of this video, don't forget, you can head over on to DxO Photolab. If you want to pick up DxO Photolab 8 or any of their other software, be sure to use my discount code at the time of checkout. That code is Magnolia, and that will save you 15% off on any of your purchases. Hey, thanks so much for sticking with me through this. I know it was a little bit longer. Appreciate your patience, and hopefully you found this helpful. Good luck with your wildlife photography. I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, take care.
you.